everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Informing Community Foundation Practice Through Peer Data, looking at fiscal year 21 annual CF Insights survey results. A few housekeeping items before we get started. If you have any technical difficulties, please reach out to any council staff or in the chat and we'll be able to assist you. There is a live transcript available if you go to the bottom of your screen to view subtitles or view live transcript. This webinar will be recorded and shared alongside with any resources for today's session. At this time, we will hand it over to Natalie Ross to get us kicked off.
Great. Thank you, Melissa. And we're so excited to have so many of you with us here today. We're excited to talk about what the latest CF Insights data can tell us about the state of our field and also how you can use it as a community foundation. We're here in partnership with Candid for a very good reason. As many of you know, the CF Insights is moving to the council on September 1st, but for now we are collaborating very closely as two organizations as we prepare for that transition. So we're excited to host you all to talk about the most recent data set from CF Insights. So I'm honored to be joined on the call here today by a number of partners. So Alita is with us as Vice President of Influence at Candid. Molly Kunkel is the President and CEO of the Center Foundation. And many of you likely know Dave Rosato, previously at Candid and now the Senior Advisor for Community Philanthropy at the Council. And I'm Natalie Ross. I'm one of the Vice Presidents at the Council responsible for membership, development, and finance. I'm really excited to connect with all of you. So before we get started, Alita and I were going to talk a little bit about the transition that's upcoming, expecting that some of you may have questions. So Alita, can you kick us off and just talk a little bit about where did the idea of moving CF Insights to the Council come from?
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here representing Candid. Candid and the council entered into exploratory talks about this transfer back in 2022, which feels like forever ago in this absence of real time. But we saw the opportunity to put the greater good first, prioritizing CF Insights' purpose and potential and impact above everything else. And that's something that's really excited me about Candid's new leadership under Ann-May Chang, our CEO, is that for so long I've been organization first, and every corner she's like, no, sector first, sector first. And I think this is the first of many decisions that'll be coming where Candid's really prioritizing how can we create systems-wide change with our partners for the greater good.
Absolutely. And for the council's perspective, we were so excited to have this opportunity to deepen our partnership with community foundations through CF Insights. But we are also equally excited to spend more than the last year working closely with Candid as a close partner to us to see what might make sense. So as you said, both of us were really driven less by what our individual organizations need and more by what does it look like to put the field first and how can we make sure that CF Insights is as effective as possible, no matter where its home might best be.
Right. Yeah, I mean, exactly. This transfer was planned, like I said, to be implemented with a sector first approach. We really want to ensure that we provide continued benefits to CF Insights members through the council's robust and growing network of community foundations, expand resources offered to CFI members. And we've been really following the council's very thoughtful and intentional approach to reaching community foundations and expanding membership, and really saw an opportunity there to increase CF Insights' impact writ large and its reach through the council. I know I've really enjoyed working with you all on this transfer and this partnership. And I'd love, Natalie, if you wanted to share how we did that.
Yeah, absolutely. So as you might imagine, this kind of transfer doesn't happen overnight. So we needed to be really deliberate. So we did a lot of work to convene our teams on each side. We really treated this like you would any other transition or acquisition to see if it made sense for both organizations and the field. So we looked at the major issues, technical, legal, financial, to make sure we are all in alignment. It was actually a really intensive process, but we're really excited to be on the other side and know that this can be really financially sustainable for both organizations to make this move.
Yeah, I mean, we did engage in so many months of planning. It was informed by feedback from key stakeholders, including advisors from CF Insights membership. The due diligence was intensive, but very amicable. It was similar to a corporate asset transfer or a merger. So we have the financial planning and transparency, staffing. As a very personal aside, I think that's the only thing I'm disappointed in is that Dave Rosado does not work at Candid anymore, and I won't see him in the office. He is a longtime favorite of Candid staff, so y'all are very lucky to have him. But also, more professionally, ensuring the transfer was grounded in maximizing members' access to resources, peers, and benefits was absolutely worth all of the work that went into this.
Yeah, and for the council, on top of all that, there's a very special aspect of this transition. For those who've been in the field for a long time, you'll know that CF Insights is really coming full circle to come home to the council. The council was involved in its original creation over 15 years ago when this field was designing a new platform to host the then called Columbus survey. So we're excited for this return home for this work and to really build on everything Candid has done for CF Insights since it's been there.
Yeah, I mean, we're really proud to have led this work since 2015, but we're equally as proud to seize the opportunity for CF Insights to have an even greater impact under the council's stewardship.
Yeah, so one question for you, Alita, is I'm sure people have wondered, CF Insights has grown since it's been at Candid. So why did Candid ultimately decide to move forward with this transfer?
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, we're doing this really funny thing where we put the greater good of the social sector first. It's been really an incredible way to wake up and approach our work every day. But beyond that, this transfer sets CF Insights up for increased impact, but it also makes space for Candid to make sure that we're laser focused on what our core function is, which is to get people essential data, information, and tools to succeed in making the world a better place. We know that people have often found it difficult to find information they're seeking amidst Candid's myriad resources, tools, products, and services. So over the next year and a half, you'll see progress as we simplify and unify Candid's offerings so that the more than 10 million people who rely on our information and tools can access everything that they need all in one place. The work behind that is really intensive, but it's really exciting as the entire sector will be able to search and vet nonprofits globally, identify potential sources of funding, and gain insights on broader trends, making the sector more equitable, efficient, and effective. And that's really how we came to our decision. But Natalie, how about for the council? How did you get to your decision to work with us on this?
Yeah, so as you might guess, it was in some ways an easy one for the council, an easy decision, just because community foundations are among the most deeply engaged organizations in our network. The council started as a network of community foundations almost 75 years ago, and we see really great value in bringing CF Insights home to the council. Not only does it complement some of the other services we provide, but it also can inform how we shape our relationship and partnership with community foundations, for example, helping us think differently about policy work as it relates to the data we have from community foundations. So we're getting ready for the September 1 transfer. We will be sharing more details, and the team is actually going to put an FAQ in the chat for everyone here if you have questions about the upcoming transition. So stay tuned for updates both from Candid and the council over the next few weeks. But thank you, Candid. Thank you, Alita, for being with us today. And I hope the big takeaway is that this is for the greater good of the field, and we plan to continue doing all the good work of CF Insights now that it's moved to the council. So now let's get into the data. And what does the data tell us, and how can you use it as a community foundation? So I'm excited to welcome Dave Rosado, as you heard, the new senior advisor for community foundations at the council, to talk to you about the latest survey results.
All right, thank you so much, Natalie. And really great to see you, Alita, again. Thanks so much for hopping on and joining us for this event. Let me just share something very transparently here, and that is to say that there is a very intense weather event happening outside of my window in the form of a severe thunderstorm. And I lost internet connection very briefly for like 30 seconds, so hopefully it doesn't happen again. But I am using my phone hotspot. Just in case I do end up dropping off, I will try my best to be right back. So we're just going to go and have a little fun here with a live event. You never know what's going to happen. But before I begin and really start talking about the data and digging into it, into the latest survey results from CF Insights, just wanted to say how excited I am to join the council team. and how thrilled I am to have the opportunity to continue this work through CF Insights and beyond as well, in service of and in collaboration with community foundations across the field, including many of you who are on the call here today. And there might be some of you who are hearing about CF Insights for the very first time. If you're joining this webinar or a webinar about these survey results for the first time, or maybe have not interacted with CF Insights in the past, I'm just going to say a little bit about the survey and what it is and when it started and what it's for. And so the survey is hosted by CF Insights, and CF Insights is a platform specifically designed for and with vast input from community foundations across the field who seek the ability to benchmark and track their own community foundation performance, operation, and sustainability as compared to peers. Each year, CF Insights conducts a survey, the annual survey, formerly known as the Columbus Survey, to inform an updated financial snapshot of the field, which looks not only at the field's collective growth in terms of assets and gifts and grants, right, that funding activity, but also takes a look at some of the key differences between community foundations of different sizes, different geographies, and more. Many different differences that we can dig into to find out some of the key differences between community foundations based on where they're located and who they serve and how they're built. The data points that we maintain and make available through our benchmarking tool show how community foundations allocate resources differently and how they sustain the work they do in support of their respective communities. The survey has been expanded on from time to time to reflect broader trends and conversations that are happening in the field. So by all means, any and all feedback anyone might have about the types of data that we collect through the survey, types of data that we don't collect through the survey that you wish we did collect through the survey, all manner of feedback is more than welcome. And just a quick note as well, since we're all here together in this webinar, that if you have any questions that you want to ask, please absolutely pop those into the Q&A box, and we'll address as many of them as we can close to the end of the program. So with that said, what did the latest survey results show us? And so we're going to start with taking a quick look here at the sample so we can understand who it is that we're talking about when we talk about the snapshot of results of the survey. And as noted before, what we're looking at here are survey results that reflect activity in the field in fiscal year 2021. We reliably get around 200 community foundations to take the survey each year, representing, as I mentioned earlier, different geographies, asset size ranges, and the size of the populations that they serve. And here, you're going to see right away, if you look on the left-hand side of the slide here, that sort of proportion of respondents by geography in terms of the broader region in the United States. The Midwest is always quite well represented. This is pretty typical, and a large piece of that is actually thanks to the number of Indiana-based community foundations that take the survey. But a lot of those community foundations that make up that Midwest region there are on the smaller side, and you can see that by how they make up half of the sample, 50%, while holding fewer than 1/3 of all the assets, while say, you look at the Western region, right? It's a far smaller portion of the sample, 17%, and they hold closer to 1/3 of all the assets that are being represented in the survey. And so when I say that, it's not going to surprise you at all to know that this region is also home to some of the largest community foundations in the country, including the Silicon Valley Community Foundation. In terms of asset size range distribution, that's the upper right-hand chart here. This is also pretty consistent with previous years, other than the fact that there is a bit more representation relative to the rest of the sample here among the largest community foundations that are $500 million in assets or above. But as always, we never have any piece of this sample, any asset size range cohort, make up less than 10% of the overall sample. And as always, you're going to see a pretty wide distribution among population size. So you're going to see community foundations that are serving very small communities up to the very largest communities in the country. And that sample basically just results in a pretty representative look at community foundations based on where they are, who they serve, and how large they are in terms of asset size. So now that we've looked at the sample, let's start to take a look at some of their collective data. The sample's collective asset total is 20% higher than it was last year. That's quite a significant jump. And the sample, let me just note really quickly here, the sample is very slightly different from year to year, but there's also very little variance in terms of who participates. And among those who participated in 2020 and 2021, the median community foundation experienced a 19% asset size increase. That's a significant increase. That's the median of those who participated in both years. Looking back, right, this is focused on the period of time when the economy was starting to recover a little bit from the initial shock of the early pandemic. And the broader economic conditions allowed for some community foundations in the field to see stronger investment returns than they did certainly the previous year. But that's only part of the story here, because if we jump over to fundraising total, the collective total, and the collective grant making total, you'll see that this sort of reflects that community foundations were during COVID and usually are anyway during other crises, other disasters, among the first and most active philanthropic players. And they certainly were during the pandemic. They mobilized their resources to support their communities during, sort of 2020 and 2021, as we can sort of refer to those 2 years as like the crisis period, the emergency period. In 2021, the vaccine was beginning to roll out in the early part of the year, but wasn't available everywhere. Not everybody had access to it, and we were very much still in an active public health emergency. It wasn't that long ago, only 2 years ago, but it does feel like a lifetime ago, just given the state of the emergency at the time. Community foundations are, as I mentioned, active players during local disasters, and oftentimes provide support during disasters even elsewhere as well, if they partner with organizations elsewhere. So it stands to reason here that the median community foundation saw a 16% increase in gifts over 2020, while maintaining the high levels of grant making that they achieved the previous year when they were actively mobilizing their resources in the first year of the pandemic, and maintained that and increased it a little bit during the second year of the pandemic, when communities needed that support the very most. So let's look at that a different way before we dig into some of the other data points that we collect here. Here's a look at the largest community foundations in the US over a period of 10 years, so going from 2012 to 2021. This here is a consistent sample. So we only look at the community foundations among the largest 100 in the country who have reported for all 10 years in this sample. Or all 10 years, through the survey, I should say. So as you'll notice, what we see across the broader sample, right, that fairly significant jump in assets, the collective total, is reflected by this set as well, with that significant jump in assets from 2020 to 2021. And it's actually the biggest jump in any 1 year of the last 10 years as well. So that's a very significant jump. And it's the same for gifts in, that's the dark blue bar, and the grants out, that's the light blue bar. Fundraising greatly increased over 2021. There are certainly a couple of very large one-time gifts in there, the establishment of a supporting organization or two, but there are thousands, tens of thousands of other much smaller gifts in that number as well. And you could see a significant increase in terms of grant making as well, from 19 to 20, right? That's the first year of the pandemic, and then another increase again in the second year of the pandemic in 2021. So maintaining those high levels of grant making. So from there, let's zoom in a little bit and look at donor advised funds. Now, the sample of participating community foundations reported having over $41 billion in donor advised fund assets in 2021. And if we go back a couple of slides, the collective total of all assets was around $120 billion. So that's a third of all assets. So clearly DApps are a significant vehicle of philanthropy across the entire field, very, very active vehicles of philanthropy. And when you look at the gifts in and the grants out, those two numbers, DApps make up an even larger portion of activity in 2021. More than half of all gifts to community foundations in the sample went to DApps, and more than half of all grants out came from donor advised funds as well, which allow community foundations to partner with their donors, right, to facilitate those donors' own philanthropic ambitions. And given how many folks are here who work at community foundations or work with community foundations, none of this is really going to surprise you, just given the level to which community foundations encourage their donors, their donor advised fund holders specifically, in particular, to mobilize their funds during COVID. So I would imagine that none of this is going to come as a major surprise. And to underline that last point, you'll see that for every asset size cohort in our sample, the distribution rate of DApps, right? So that's the percentage of assets that go out in grants during a given year, the percentage of grants, grants is a percentage of assets, I should say. It's consistently higher for DApps than it is for all funds. And so you'll see across the sort of spectrum of community foundations by asset size, that smaller community foundations tend to be more comprised of endowed funds, tend to have less of their total fund portfolio in DApps, right? So their distribution rates are going to stay around the sort of more standard, right, 4 to 6%. And then you have the larger community foundations that have more pass-through funds, more non-endowed funds, more DApps in their portfolios as well. And they're going to be reflecting higher distribution rates as well when they take the survey. Sticking to DApps for just one more moment, or for a couple more moments, I should say. As part of the survey, we do also ask whether our participating community foundations ensure that their donor advised funds remain active by enforcing a policy against dormant or inactive donor advised funds, from which donors don't recommend the grant over some predefined period of time, right? So as part of a fund agreement, the community foundation might tell the donor that that they recommend making a grant within 1 or 2 or 3 or 5 years from the time that they establish a grant. Otherwise, the community foundation might take some action, which I'll get back to in a moment. So as you can see, the vast majority of the sample do report having such a policy in place, right? 71%. And you can reasonably expect that the 11% of those who didn't respond to the question have policies. So some portion of that 11%, it's safe to assume, also have policies as well. So it's a vast majority of the field that do have policies in place. Most community foundations told us that, if they have a policy in place, they consider a DAP to be dormant if a grant isn't recommended within 3 years. And so you can see that here on this bar chart, right? That the vast majority say either 1 or 2 or 3 years is the period of time that they consider whether or not a grant is dormant, if there's some form of fund activity within that 3-year period. A handful also said that 5 is the longest they would wait before taking an action. So virtually the entire sample said 5 is the absolute maximum, but most said 3 would be the maximum period of time that they would wait. And in terms of the actions that community foundations might take to address those dormant or inactive donor advised funds, those actions do vary. But the first step will almost always be for the community foundation to reach out to the fund holder to encourage them to recommend a grant. That's close to everybody, 80%. Others told us that after that predetermined period of time expires, they might go ahead and distribute available funds in alignment with the donor's original intent. And others said that they will transfer the funds to one of the foundation's unrestricted funds. So in either case, after that period of time, whether it's 1 or 3 or 5 years, they will take some action to ensure that those funds do get mobilized and go out to the community. So moving away from assets and donor advised funds, there are other data points for sure, dozens of data points that the CF Insights survey does collect from community foundations. So I'll just speak about a couple of those here before moving on to the next section of today's webinar, today's program. And so we're going to start with revenue mix. And you'll see, right, this is the revenue mix for all community foundations. That's right here on the right-hand side, that pie chart there. And all of the other ones are reflective of those individual asset size cohorts. And you're going to see that no matter how large the community foundation is, whether you're in the smallest group or in the largest group, it's the fees that community foundations assess to cover the cost of managing individual component funds, individual donor advised funds, individual scholarships, that are going to be the main driver of operating revenues to sustain the operations of the community foundation. In general, as you move through the different cohorts of increasing asset size, you're going to see slightly more diversification beyond admin fees. That's not to say that admin fees play a smaller role in supporting the operations of the community foundation. You could see that it takes up roughly the same amount of space collectively, those other slices, those other forms of revenue, but they start to sort of become a little bit more diversified from each other. As smaller community foundations will engage in more direct fundraising, that's this dark blue slice here, pie slice here, to support operations while they grow. And medium to large community foundations may become more involved in things like fee-for-service work, which is often going to be engaged in providing back office support for private foundations and sort of similar services like that, but could include other forms like facility rental and things like that. But either way, the largest community foundations are the only ones that say that even more than 1% of their operating revenues come from fee-for-service. And finally, Here is a look at staff capacity by asset size cohort as well. So of course, as asset size increases, it's going to stand to reason, of course, that the size of the number of staff at the community foundation will also be, they might be working with larger donor bases. There's going to be a little bit more specialization in terms of bringing on staff for different functions, like legal staff, communications, marketing, design staff, research staff, data team, and other staff to support emerging community leadership efforts. So you're going to see that as you go up in terms of asset size, that the number of FTEs the median number of FTEs increases as well. Now on the flip side, that's the dark blue bar, right? That's showing the number of funds community foundations are managing per FTE on staff. And that number starts to go down a little bit generally as asset size increases as well. So again, that's reflecting that there are more staff at the community foundation. There are more specialized staff functions. There are fewer staff that are directly working with donors. And so you're going to see that number generally starts to tick down. And that's, more of an economy of scale, if anything, because they just have more staff on hand. So before I turn things over to Natalie for the next section, I just want to remind everyone that these and many other data points, many other data points from the snapshot are available for free for anyone to access. We'll pop a link into the chat so you can see where, explore more of that data. That data is free for anyone to access at any time online. You don't need a login. You don't need to be a member of CF Insights or the council to access any of that data. And in addition to the aggregated collective data that we walked through today, as I mentioned, there are more data points, but there are also some disaggregated data points as well. Percentage of assets that are in donor advised funds per each individual community foundation, distribution rates, fundraising activity per capita, and several other data points as well, all available on the site for free. As we get later in the program, more than happy to answer any questions about the data or about some of the data that I didn't share today, but that's just a quick look at some of the key findings from the 2021 survey. So from here, I will turn things back over to Natalie.
Great, thanks, Dave. It's always great to see the data and see how it's changing over time, but also see what stories it might tell us about the field. So I'm excited to now dig in a little bit to how do individual community foundations use this data to inform their work. So we're honored to have Molly with us from the Center Foundation in Pennsylvania. So Molly, I'll start with you and I would love to hear, how do you use this data at your community foundation, and what questions does it help you answer, or decisions does it help inform for the foundation?
Hi, thanks, Natalie and David. Happy to be here and to share the information. We've been engaging with CF Insights and using the data for many years, and I find it really helpful and use it in a variety of ways. I mean, we regularly refer to it when we're just looking at making any kind of changes, but it's particularly helpful. I find it's particularly helpful when working with my board and recommending things of kind of just benchmarking where we are and kind of saying, we're about where we should be. We are right on target where many others are. But recently, in the last couple of years, it's been very helpful to me to say to them, we're low for staffing. We don't have enough staff for where we are. And so it's really helpful to be able to have that data and say, most foundations our size have more people, and that's really given them the comfort level and I think just an understanding. It's an easy way for them to understand the sector. I tend to forget, being out and active in the sector and having I've been in the roles president, CEO for 10 years now. So I talk to a lot of people, have a pretty good inherent understanding of that, but I forget sometimes that board members don't have access to that, or they'll see the data here and there, but they don't internalize it in the same way. So it's really helpful to be able to pull that up and know that it's across the board, kind of across the whole sector and field information coming in. So I use it to inform my own decisions about direction and where I want to go, but also to inform my board and staff about, why and where I think we should be heading.
Mm-hmm. Great. No, those are super helpful examples. And Dave, I know you work with lots of community foundations who use this data. Could you have any additional examples of how this data has been used within community foundations?
Yeah, absolutely. And Molly, thank you for sharing that example, because I would say that that's probably the most common use case of the data is understanding kind of like where a community foundation is in relation to peers in terms of their available staff capacity, and whether they are able to continue to meet the needs of their donors to the extent that they would like to, or to the extent that their donors might be used to, as they continue to be as they continue to grow over time generally. So I actually have a couple of examples related to this that I could share. There was one community foundation in a southern state that was pretty aggressive. You could use the word aggressive, but certainly they were accelerating their growth in donor advised funds. They were just bringing on a lot of new DAF holders over a fairly short period of time. And so the argument that they were making internally is that as they were bringing on more DAF holders, they found it more and more difficult to maintain the levels of service that those donors would be signing up for, basically, with the number of staff that they had. And so they had an inkling, they had a suspicion that they were operating quite lean relative to peers that were made up similarly to them. And so they came to me to put together some data for them on other community foundations, including regional community foundations and others in other parts of the country that were similarly composed in terms of their asset mix, right? Their focus on donor advised funds, their focus on scholarships and other types of funds. And they were also interested in seeing community foundations in this group that were growing at the rate that they were in terms of the new DApps that they were establishing year over year. And so I put that data for them, and we started running some reports in terms of the staffing that they had in comparison to this community foundation. And to a peer, basically every single peer, they had more donor relations staff, they had more development staff, they just had more staff capacity. Their operating budgets were larger, they had more staff. And so this community foundation very much was operating quite lean. And if they were going to continue to grow at an accelerated pace year over year, especially with their DAFs, they felt very strongly that they needed to bring on more staff support. And so we put that data together for them, shared it with their board, made a very clear case to bring on that additional staff. And I believe they brought on 2 or maybe even 3 new staff in those functions following that exercise. And it allowed them to continue that growth, that trajectory that they were on, because they had that additional support. There was another community foundation I'll just share very quickly in the Midwest that, and the reason I want to share this this example too is because it was a very similar need to the Southern Community Foundation, but the difference for them is they actually use the data themselves. The way that CF Insights is built, and hopefully we have a couple of minutes to show how the tool works, but the way that the site is built is it's very it's very user friendly. It's very intuitive to allow an individual, even if they're coming to it for the first time, to pull data in. And this community foundation came to me with the question asking if we had data to support their argument that they were operating lean. I said, yes, absolutely. Let me know if I can help. And they got back to me and shared this report that they put together with the data that we have on the site. So I actually did not help them with this, but the data was there, accessible for them, and they were able to make the same case.
Mm-hmm. Great. And I'm curious, Dave, as you were presenting the data, I noticed there were several data points where it's like, wow, this really connects to a national conversation that's happening around DAFs and DAF reforms. And this data, can tell a very important story about community foundations and how they manage DAFs. And so I'm curious where you see those connections in the data.
Yeah, no, that absolutely. So with donor advised funds, in particular, there's actually a data point that I didn't share in this presentation just for time. And that is the flow rate of donor advised funds. So flow rate is a term that was coined by 2 researchers who are embarking on a broader donor advised fund research collaborative initiative. And basically what it refers to is the comparison of the ratio you could say of gift dollars in versus grant dollars out. And so if you have a quote unquote 100% flow rate, that just means that the proportion of grant dollars that went out in a given year is the same as the proportion of gift dollars that came in that very same year. So the reason I define that is because flow rates, just as with distribution rates among DApps, maintain very high levels. So if you go to the website, you could see how high those flow rates are, how high those distribution rates are across the entire sample, no matter what size they are. And also it's very consistent if you go back to last year and the year before when we added flow rate for the first time. that those rates are continuing to be quite high relative to other fund types. So, you think about that in relation to, a proposed floor, right? A proposed minimum distribution rate, for example. Donor advised funds, very consistently and quite significantly do expand beyond that sort of 5% or so suggested distribution rate. They're in the double digits, 10, 11, 12% year over year. To be perfectly transparent, right? That's collective data, right? It's not per fund data. So, I think additional research would be really, really helpful in this area. But in terms of establishing a baseline of understanding about how active donor advised funds are, certainly it could help with that conversation. And then also with the inactivity policies as well, which I did talk about during the presentation, you could see just how many community foundations have a policy in place, right? Any community foundation in theory can exercise their variance power at any point, but building in that codified policy allows them to say upfront to their donor, there has to be some activity within 2 or 3 or 5 years, whatever that time horizon might be, because the idea of establishing that donor advised fund is to get the funds mobilized and is to get those grants out into the community to support organizations, local organizations and folks locally as well. So I think that those 2 or 3 data points, if you count the flow rate as well, do connect back to the larger conversation. And it would be an even stronger resource if we have even more community foundations participate in the survey next year when we start collecting, or later this year, I should say, when we start collecting fiscal year 2022 data.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is a big reason what we hope that moving to the council will help expand the reach of the survey. So that's one of our kind of key performance indicators of a successful transition, is really expanding that sample size. So we're excited to do that. So before we go back to Molly for advice for peers, Dave, I do wonder if you could just answer a quick question of how do you access the data and how do you build your peer report that you've been talking about, just so people have a sense of how to use it.
Yeah, absolutely. So is it demo time? We can make it demo time.
Sure.
I'm happy to share my screen. So let me go ahead and do that here. Going to just share my browser window here. Just a quick note, by the way, we were talking about the transition of CF Insights from Candid to the council as of September 1st. So that's going to be happening in just a little bit over a month. For now, the website is there. You can access it. None of the functionality will change whatsoever on September 1st. It'll just have a different look. So what we're looking at here is CF Insights as it's currently hosted over at Candid. With that said, though, what I'm going to do is just provide a quick demo of how to create a peer group and how to access some of that data. So if we wanted to look at, let's say donor advised fund growth over the last 5 years, you would start on the website in the benchmarking section and you would click new peer group. And so what I'm going to do here is just name that peer group. It doesn't really matter, but let's just say webinar demo DAF growth. And from there, what you would do once you name that peer group is you can add characteristics that help you define who your peers are actually going to be, right? So you might want to look for community foundations that are in your state or in your broader region, maybe that have at least a third of their assets in donor advised funds, have at minimum 5 finance staff. Whatever those characteristics are, you can define any or all of them so that your peers meet any or all of them. So let's start with a very basic characteristic and just limit our peer group to those who took the survey, the latest survey, right? So we're just going to look for 2021 information here. There actually, when I click show results, you're going to see that there are a handful of community foundation who have already shared 2022 data with us. And so we applaud them, thank them for being ahead of schedule. So they could ignore our call for 2022 data when that goes out in a couple months or so. So we start with that, and that's going to be our first characteristic, but you can actually add as many characteristics as you want. You can make sure that they have support of supplied data for 2021 and their total asset size is somewhere in the neighborhood of $200 to $350 million, let's say. So you can continue to add characteristics and say, I want community foundations whose assets are $200 million and whose assets are under $350 million. Okay, and so we can say from there that we want, actually, let me just delete that characteristic and show you what that looks like first. And when you click show results, the table underneath shows the results of that search. And so what you can do here is you can just very easily kind of scan through and see who are the community foundations that meet those criteria, but you might want to bring in additional data points. And so what you can do from here, you don't have to add other characteristics. You can simply click a metrics button here, and you can start to add new metrics in the form of other data columns, basically. So you can add their state. Maybe you want to see where everybody's located. If you don't recognize them by name, you can bring in donor advised fund assets. You can bring in donor advised fund assets as a percentage of all assets. And since we're still talking about donor advised funds and the growth in funds, you can bring in the number of funds. And because we've been talking here about staffing, we can bring in the FTE total, the development staff total, and let's go for the donor relations staff total as well. And you can see, right, once I add all of these columns, you can reorder them if you want to sort of view them in any particular order. That is all available for you. Once you click apply, it's going to generate that table nearly instantly. So you're going to see all of this additional, very rich data on community foundations that are within your potential peer group. And once you look at all of that, all of those comparative data points in comparison to your own community foundation, you can make a decision about which, I don't know, let's say 3 or 5, maybe up to 6 peers that you want to dive a bit deeper on, pull in additional data points, maybe reach out to a contact there and ask them about their direct experience in terms of whether or not they've grown at a particular rate over the last couple of years. But if you wanted to pull in some of that longitudinal data yourself, that is a very simple thing to do. You could just take the survey year and bring it back a couple of years. So let's go with 2019. This will be the last thing I show. And when you scroll down the table, you can see 2022 data, 2021 data, 2020 data. If I go to the next page of results, you're going to start to see some of the 2019 data when I start scrolling down a bit. All of this data is exportable to Excel. You can just throw it into an Excel file, work with it offline, very easily generate some longitudinal tables from that, data tables. And you could see which community foundations have added headcount in development or donor relations or another function over the last 3 years. And you can use that as the basis for your internal conversations, and you can go from there to make some decisions about how your own community foundation operates and is staffed.
Great. Thanks, Dave. It's a great demo of really clearly how you can use this tool. So I'm going to jump to Molly before we get to questions in the chat. So Molly, you said you've been using these data set and these tools for many years. So what advice would you give your peers on how best to start using this data for the first time?
I think just going in and kind of playing around with it. Again, whenever if you're making any decisions about the direction you want to go, staffing, anything like that, but even before you have a particular question you want to have answered, it's nice to go in. Setting up a peer group is often one of the first things I do, just to sort of get a sense of, in my region with other community foundations about the same size as mine. That's a really helpful aspect of it. And several times in the past, I've created that peer group and then reached out, just called some of the people like to follow up. And it's like, okay, how are you doing this or that? I see you're in my peer group. I've gotten phone calls from other people in the same way saying, I put a peer group together with CF Insights data, and now I'm wondering, I'm looking for how people handle, and it can be anything, staffing or board size or anything like that. So again, as people in the field know, it's an incredibly open and generous field with information and with sharing. So I think really going in and just looking around, seeing what works for you, but certainly if you have a particular need, something that you're looking to change, going in, and then you really can dive into the data in a specific way for what you're looking for. And I would encourage, again, more people to, as many as possible, to participate in the survey. It is certainly, the more we get there, the more helpful it will be. And I liked, Natalie, what you said earlier just about this partnership. I think in general, this and some of the other organizations, a lot of people right now are just working to strengthen the field. And, what does it look like to put the field first? So I think having this data is great for everybody. And the more people we can get to participate, the better that will be. So I look forward to broadening that, hopefully by bringing this into the council, will be able to broaden the availability as well as the participation.
Yeah, no, and that's a great segue for the question that we had in the chat. So Dave, do you want to talk a little bit about what's available to everyone within the CF Insights data and survey, and then also what will be available to council members once this transition happens?
Yeah, absolutely. So those aggregated data points that I shared earlier on the slides, you can go to survey.cfinsights.org to see all of that data right now. I believe we shared it in the chat. We could also reshare it here. And all of that will give you a snapshot of the field as I presented it with some of those disaggregated data points as well. You can go back as far as 2017 on that website, and then there's an archive of PDF publications that go all the way back to 2008. That take a look at some of the same data, some different data points as well, some variance year to year. So those are all of the snapshots available. As I mentioned, there's no login required for any of those. You don't need to be a member of CF Insights or the council or anything like that to access any of those data. And that's just driven by the generosity of time that community foundations extend by taking part in the survey every year. And so really appreciate the input of community foundations across the country to share that data with us and allow us to develop that snapshot every year and share it back with you as well. In terms of what members can access, so I alluded to membership earlier. What members can do is they can log onto the site and do everything that I just shared when I shared my screen the last time, to create peer groups, to download data tables, to run some visual charts, which I didn't demonstrate. But you can also generate some visual data visualizations on the website as well with your peer group. You can also reach out to me directly, to the council team, and to me personally to support you in terms of helping you really understand what question, how to answer the questions that you might be asking internally. If you're not sure where to start, I can help you create that first peer group that Molly alluded to earlier as well. So I can help you just sort of determine what the right criteria might be for you to find the right peers that will work for your discussions. And that will help you sort of make the decisions that you're looking to make. And then also, in terms of the data itself, we also offer these customized dashboards to members as well. That's more of a service that we provide to you, right? So as I mentioned, all of that data is available to you on the website. If you're a member, you can log in, generate your reports, generate your peer groups, and work with them as you see fit. If you want something that that comes in a sort of a deliverable of a PDF, a PowerPoint that combines several data points together to tell more of a sort of cohesive story around how you compare with your peers, you can reach out to us and we will generate that dashboard for you with some takeaways as well. So if there are data points that are more interesting to bring up and lift up as a sort of key takeaway in terms of how you compare with your peers, or maybe there's an outlier in your peer group or anything like that, we will call that out. We'll explain why, and that'll help to inform the conversations you have internally at your community foundations. To become or to get access to CF Insights, right? So currently it's at Candid, right? So you can join and become a member directly with Candid up until September 1st. After September 1st, to gain access to CF Insights, you will do that through your council membership. We're going to share a whole lot more details about that over the next few weeks. Natalie, I don't know if you want to say a little bit more about that, but certainly you'll be able to do that by being a council member and then opting into a CF Insights add-on, plus add-on. And that will give you full access to all of the tools that I shared here. As I mentioned, the one-to-one support and advisory services that would allow you to get the data that you need and make sure that it's actionable as well.
Yeah, and the only thing I'll add to that, Dave, is that the new combined cost of your council membership and the plus add-on is less than the majority of organizations at CF Insights are currently paying to be members of both organizations. So our hope is that this transition really reduces the cost of accessing CF Insights going forward, to expand the data set and the number of organizations both giving data and using it in the future. So more to come over the coming weeks about how this will look going into the transition, and then after September 1st from the council about how to get access to CF Insights. So my last question for both Dave and Molly, we'll start with you, Dave, and then Molly can have the last word, is what do you think that this data means for the field? Any kind of closing remarks that you'd like to give?
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, I go back to a community foundation I partnered with a few years ago for whom I conducted a cost study for them, a cost revenue study. And so we really dug deep into their economic model and their overall sustainability to determine how they might reassess their fee structure and things like that. So it was a really involved project, but at the conclusion of it, after it was done, they had some really actionable data that allowed them to make some really important decisions about how they serve their donors in different ways, and how they price that work, how they value that work as well. And what he said was quite pithy. He just said, now we have hard data to back up our anecdotes. It's very, very simply put. But what he said was, we were talking to our board about what we suspected to be true about the broader field based on the number of people that we happen to have in our personal networks and that we happen to have direct interactions with. But we didn't have the sort of broader view of what was happening across a larger portion of the field. And CF Insights allowed us to get access to that. So for them and for, I imagine, many in the field, it's just having that hard data to back up the anecdotes that they collect individually.
Great.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that's a great, it's just really useful. As I said before, we can kind of, those of us that are in the field and in the trenches regularly have a good sense of what we believe to be true. And it frequently is, our intuition is good. But when you're telling the story to other people, you need to have that data. And just to confirm, because sometimes intuition is not correct and you learn different things. So I think it really is very helpful to be able to use that to move your own community foundation forward, as well as the field and sector in general. And I applaud the efforts and certainly hope that by doing this, it'll reduce the cost and make it more accessible and available to more community foundations, so it can better the field even more.
Great, thank you both. And I think I'll just close this portion by saying that as we were doing this, having these transition conversations with Dave and the team at Candid, one vision statement for CF Insights that really sticks with me about why this matters for the field is, imagine if every community foundation, if each community foundation could know what all community foundations know. And so how are you really able to tap into that collective knowledge of our field for your individual impact in your community? And how can we leverage that to do each of our work better? So hopefully that's also inspiring to you and it gets you excited about this upcoming transition. But as Dave said, the tools, the data, all of it is still available at Candid until September 1st. There'll be no interruption in services. So you can dig in now to the latest survey results, and then more to come about the transition in the future. So over to you, Dave.
All right, thanks so much, Natalie. And thank you also, Molly, for joining us today. So I'm going to go back into my screen share one more time to close this out. And hopefully we have a few more questions coming in. We can answer those with the last few minutes that we have. So for now, just going to speak very briefly about how you can participate in all of this and get access to these tools. So let's start first by having me echo what Molly mentioned. The value of the data is really only as much as the number of community foundations that participate in the survey every year. So contributing in this effort just expands a broader understanding of the field. Given some of the connections that especially the donor advised fund data has to larger national conversations about policy, it could also serve the field in that way as well. So that data gets shared back with you all. You get even more access to it as a member, but it also helps inform some of the larger conversations that we're having on a policy level. So it's really, really important and really, really just helpful and appreciated for as many community foundations as possible to contribute to this field snapshot by going to data.cfinsights.org to register if you're not registered, or to just log in and share the very latest data that you have. You can always go back and share data for previous years as well, which also helps us when we do our longitudinal lookbacks. But stay tuned, because this fall we will be putting out our call for 2022 data. So we will be right back at it to generate our next and latest snapshot. And then also, just given the confines of a webinar, for lack of a better phrase, I only was able to demonstrate so much, but there are several dozens, hundreds of other data points that are accessible through the tool. And there are many other things that you can do in terms of how you can collaborate with others at your foundation to create the right peer group for you. So if you want to set up a demonstration, sort of deeper dive demo, just reach out to me and I'm more than happy to provide one. So that's my email address right there on the slide, and maybe we can put that in the chat as well. And then earlier, we mentioned the FAQs page that's on the COF website. So if you go to cof.org/cfinsights-FAQ, you can see more information about the transfer, a little bit more information about what to expect, right? So as Natalie mentioned, everything will be living at the council as of September 1. But as I mentioned earlier as well, all the functionality will be exactly the same. It'll just have a different look. Just to also underline and support something that Natalie mentioned earlier as well. There is some pretty heavy overlap between CF Insights members, current CF Insights members, and council members. So for all of you, virtually all of you, the only thing that's going to change is that the bill for both is going to go down. So that will be the only change for you all. And we're going to make it as seamless a transition as possible, no interruption in service whatsoever. And we're going to be in communication with all of you at every step of the way. For those of you who are current council members and are interested in learning more about CF Insights, as I mentioned, you could set up a demo with me, and the price for adding CF Insights will be less than it was previously when they were 2 separate memberships. So more than happy to say a whole lot more about that with individual community foundations based on where you would fall in terms of your, where the price would be based on your size. But other than that, I will end the slides here and stop my screen share, and we can open it up for questions.
Yeah, we have a question in the chat for you, which is about, is there any information from the survey about impact investing, whether the amount of impact investing happening or interest in impact investing at community foundations?
Yes, that's a great question. We have limited information on impact investing. It is absolutely one of the areas that I think we might see some benefit to expanding the survey into. So to the extent that we collect information on impact investing, we collect the revenues earned on impact investments made. So of course, these are going to be below market, right? But the idea is that we're tracking the extent to which revenues are being earned on impact investments. And that's a good way to that's a sort of a proxy metric for how many community foundations are engaging with it to begin with. But we can track that. We just added that very recently. I want to say it was last year or maybe 2 years ago. We have other questions written about impact investing, but have not added them to the survey yet. So definitely it's an area that we can look more into expanding on.
Yeah, and I will say there's also a report from the council every year with the Common Fund Institute, which specifically looks at investment returns from community and private foundations, that does have data about the level of interest and actual impact investing happening at community foundations. So that could be another tool. Great. One other question from Nancy about, do you need to be a CF Insights? Can you be a CF Insights member only? So the answer is no. Going forward after September 1st, you will need to be a council member and then add access to the CF Insights Plus membership, as we call it, in order to access the tools. I will say things that are currently available to the whole field, some of the tools at Candid that CF Insights has, and the survey results will remain open to everyone. So that will not change at all. All that will be that you'll need to have membership for are some of those added membership benefits that are moving to be attached to your council membership. Okay, another question for you, Dave, from Julie. Was there any info about CFs that have their own endowment to use for operating expenses or unrestricted foundation grants?
Yes, the answer is yes, we do. We have that information. We've collected that for the entire time, basically, through CF Insights. And so I really appreciate you asking that question, Julie. I see you in the chat, because that was another example that I didn't share because I was a little concerned about time, but thinking about a community foundation that reached out to me because their board had questions about them establishing an operating endowment. And so they wanted to get a sense for how many community foundations have one and roughly their asset size range. They were curious to know how common that was in the field. And so I was able to establish for them that it's certainly not uncommon. It's quite common for community foundations in that particular foundation's asset size range to have an operating endowment. But yes, we have operating endowment and operating reserve and internal distributions from unrestricted grants. Yes.
And if I could just actually ask a real quick question, because I know we're just coming up on time, David, but if somebody like the impact investing,
For sure.
That's something I certainly am interested in. if people have other things that they'd like to see included that aren't there, can they contact you, or who
100%.
would we contact for consideration?
Yeah, you can reach out directly to me. And yeah, I'm happy to bring it to the team. I think what's really exciting about this transition is it's going to allow us to kind of take a step back and look at the state of the survey, as it were, and see, what brings the most value to community foundations and where we could enhance that value. So absolutely, yes, I would just start with reaching out to me and we can go from there.
Great. All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. A lot of really good information, both about the transition and the latest data survey results, as well as what you can do with the survey. So thank you, Molly. Thank you, Alita. Thank you, Dave, for being here with us. And thank you everyone for logging in. Have a great week.
Thanks,
So
everybody.
much.